You got Birds 365 here on the JAKIB Media YouTube channel. Thank you very much for streaming in. If you want, you can hit the like button. If you like Bill Colarulo, hit the like button. I'm getting the feeling nobody likes me today on the stream, but that's all right. If you like Andrew DiCecco, you can hit the like button. We need a little help with our algorithm, so go ahead and hit that like button. All right, I want to clear something up here with you, Andrew, because again, yeah, I'm taking a little grief on the stream side today. The game that Nicholas Morrow got Sam Howell 3 times behind the line of scrimmage. They were sacks. How many of those were blitz plays? How many would you consider them blitz plays when Nicholas Morrow had the biggest sack game of the year for the Philadelphia Eagles?
Oh, man, I have to think back to week 4 here. I would say at least 2 of them, but he hasn't had any sacks since then. So I think that was largely a byproduct of the pressure the defensive line was getting and not necessarily an indication of Nicholas Morrow being the sack phenom.
Understood, but they were blitzes, not they weren't dropping Hassan Reddick back in pass coverage on the play. Because someone just accused me of not knowing what I talked about because they weren't blitzes when Nicholas Morrow. If you bring a 5th guy, wherever you bring that 5th guy from, that's considered a blitz, correct?
Right.
Yeah, they were blitzes. So, Dominique, if you're going to take shots at me, at least be right on the stream. At least know what you're talking about. If you're going to tell me I don't know what I'm talking about. Earlier, he called me a hater. That I can take because at least that's just an opinion. It's an incorrect opinion, but it's an opinion, so you're welcome to it. But when you say that Nicholas Morrow didn't get any sacks against didn't come off the blitz against the Commanders, you're just flat out wrong. So try and clean that up a little bit. All right, AD, going down to DC, the Eagles have had some success there over the last 2-3. I think we need to look at just Nick Sirianni era. You go back further than that, and even though there are players that were here certainly before Sirianni took over. Why have they been able to go down to DC and just beat up on this team? Is it they're just that more talented? Is House of Horrors down there for Washington getting out of a bad stadium? Why have the Eagles been dominant in that building?
Well, they've been able to outclass them, and for many years they've always been the better team for as long as I can remember. And also, it's a short ride out there. You're not getting on a plane. You're not going cross country. You're not doing this arduous travel. So I think that also plays into it. It's also a division rival that they completely outclass every single time that they play twice a year. So I think that all sort of blends into the reason why they've just been able to have such a dominance over this team. The biggest concern I have this week, Jody, is the field at FedEx Field, because that's notoriously been one of the worst stadiums, probably the worst stadium in the NFL for a multitude of reasons, one of which being the surface of the field.
Yeah, and with Jalen Hurts' knee, it's a real concern. Hopefully that's not going to be a problem this week. Not on the injury report, which is good. But so, Andrew, question for you, man. Everyone's fired up about the Kevin Byard trade, obviously, what he does to this secondary. But now that slot corner position, it's been a revolving door since Avonte Maddox went out. They lost Zach McPherson in the preseason. Who do you have play that slot corner position now, adding Kevin Byard to this team?
Long-term or this week?
Both. How about that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So why don't we look at this week first? So I would say Eli Ricks, and speaking to him yesterday, he said he's going to play a lot more on first and second down this week. So he's focusing on his run fits. So I think that he's done an excellent job stepping in. This is now his second game against the Packers playing the slot. He only really played it very minor in LSU as a freshman in light of injury. So he's really taken to a new position. As obviously the position has been largely undermanned, but I thought that he really has asserted himself and entrusted Sean Desai entrusted him in a critical moment to make a big play in that game. And I think that really speaks to his development. So I would probably start out with him and mix in some Josiah Scott, but I think long-term, you're going to probably see an amalgam of players sort of shoulder that burden. Bradley Roby being the prominent player in that role when he's healthy. He's still dealing with the shoulder injury. But I think they have 3 players there, and James Bradbury is capable of doing it as well. Obviously, you wouldn't like to see that ideally, but I think that they have 3 guys there that they sort of are finding their footing there at the position.
Blankenship and Byard 100% of the snaps each in this game, if healthy, if there's no injury involved. the Eagles have not been a rotational safety position. You think Byard goes in and takes every single snap this week?
I do. I do, because he's a pro. He's a consummate professional. Based on talking to Ricks yesterday, Jody, he, unprompted mentioned how Byard's taken to the defense, how he's really, acting as if he's been here already, and it's sort of a seamless plug-in. So I would be surprised if he doesn't. Terrell Edmonds played 100% of the snaps last week. Obviously, it was out of necessity, but Kevin Byard is a veteran, a two-time All-Pro, someone who I think is really going to put the time in these next, since he's got here, especially within the next 48 hours to master the playbook, get in there, and knowing that it's a necessity that he really does stay out there for 100% of the snap. I think Sidney Brown's certainly going to have a role as a third safety, but right now you want to have Blankenship and Byard out there manning the middle of your back end. That's the best recipe for success for the Eagles.
They call Penn State linebacker you. Are we going to have to start calling Middle Tennessee safety you?
You almost have to now, especially depending on how the performance of the two.
Yeah, it's crazy to have two Middle Tennessee starting safeties, but love it. Love it. Let's go down to that defensive line for a second. One of the rookies that a lot of people keep calling for is they want to see Nolan Smith play. He gets his first sack last week, but he does that on only 4 snaps. What do you think's holding back Nolan Smith from getting more reps on this team?
Just the amount of players in front of him. I think in normal circumstances, Bill, I think you would see Nolan Smith carve out a more prominent role on defense, but right now he's sort of a victim of circumstance. When he is going in, you're seeing him go out there with a player with something to prove, with his hair on fire, looking to make a play. It was nice to see him get that sack there, because he's really taken to special teams and become a leader, very much so, as a rookie in that role. So he's done everything the right way. It's just a matter, there's not enough snaps to go around. It's not indicative of what the team may think of Nolan right now. I just think that as we get further into the season, you're going to need someone like a Nolan Smith. You're going to need someone like a Contavious Street to step in there and provide snaps. It's a long season, and sometimes it's a war of attrition. So he'll get his opportunity. It's just unfortunately not come as early as many would have liked.
All right. Since we're talking about backup defensive ends, will Derek Barnett be able to get through the game without taking a penalty so that the Eagles can get a conditional 7th round pick, which can disappear if he doesn't last the entire season with the team, in exchange for Barnett's services come Monday, right before the trade deadline?
So you're in the amongst the folks that would like to see him or think that he will be traded.
Oh yeah,
Jody's not a fan of DB.
For the past 2 years, when they re-signed him, one of the few Howie Roseman mistakes, and he will attempt to take a little of the mistake away by getting something in exchange for him. Between you and me, Andrew, I don't think there's a league that would give up a team in the league that would give up a conditional 7th. McMullen's been telling me, they'll get a day 3. They'll get a day 3.
I think they would get a day 3.
You have as many pressures as he does this year. You and he are tied at 0 apiece. Nobody's given up anything for him.
True. I just to play devil's advocate, I think that his age, his pedigree, the position, it's a very valuable position in this league, and I think he provides a lot of depth there. I think he started 45 games in this league, so having him as your 5th or 6th edge rusher is really valuable for a team that likes to send a tidal wave of pass rushers. I think he's more valuable to the Eagles in such a minute role than he would be to someone else.
Oh, so you think he's staying? Even if someone offered Howie a 7th round pick, they'd keep him, huh?
I think Derek Barnett stays, and I also think someone like Contavious Street stays. I know I've gotten a lot of people reaching out saying 7 defensive tackles, they can't keep that. That's not feasible to last the rest of the season. The team views Contavious Street maybe different than a lot of fans may, and they really value what he brings to the table. That's my understanding.
Contavious Street actually has made a play this year, unlike Derek Barnett. So I just felt
Contavious,
the need to say that.
Not a bad defensive tackle. I mean, he's versatile. He can get after the quarterback. He can stop the run. He wasn't bad in New Orleans. He was pretty good with the 49ers. So I kind of like that move in the offseason. They brought him in. But Derek Barnett, finally, though, Jody, to make you feel better, is he's getting less and less snaps every week. I think he only played 7 snaps last week. So
told you I love that Sean Desai.
Yeah, so he's starting to learn very, very quickly. Let's jump over to the offensive side of the ball, Andrew, because we've seen some uncharacteristic things from Jalen Hurts this year in the turnover department. Last year, only has 6 interceptions and 2 fumbles all season. So far through 7 weeks, he already has 8 interceptions and 2 fumbles. What's going on? Is it just fluke plays, or is there something off with Jalen Hurts in the turnover department?
Some of them you could point to as being fluke plays, Bill. I mean, I think there's one in the Jets game off the top of my head. The Dolphins one was a little goofy, but I think it's an amalgam of things, right? You're still finding your way with a new offensive coordinator. Yes, we know that he has a longstanding history with Brian Johnson, but it's a whole different ball game when you're working in concert with someone calling the plays. Now, I think sometimes there's circumstances where he's pressing, and I think it's just, I don't know. You don't want to say it's certainly not regression. I just think that there's some plays that, look, we've seen it with Joe Burrow. You see it across the league. There hasn't been a standout quarterback really this part in the season that hasn't had some sort of a blemish or some sort of a rough patch. And I think you're just sort of seeing it. For anyone to expect Jalen Hurts to be able to maintain that level of production in last season and continue it on where he was pretty much flawless, it's just not realistic. Some of the fumbles, yeah, you like to see that get cleaned up. But I think some of those interceptions were a byproduct of some fluky plays.
I need you to give me a 0 to 10 rating on a Eagle move. 10 being this player could turn out to be the most important and useful, picked up off the scrap heap in the National Football League this year. 0 being I'd rather have Joseph Nada. I'd rather have Greg Ward. I'd rather have Devin. Is he really even a football player? Allen activated games above Julio Jones. Julio's signing 0 to 10. What kind of number you stick on it?
As far as long-term impact, Jody, I would say
impact, period. Long-term, short-term, doesn't matter. Just impact for the Philadelphia Eagles.
I'm going to go ahead and right off the top of my head, give it a 7. Nice. And the reason being is the Eagles sorely lack a big-bodied receiver behind Devontae and AJ. You're looking at Olamide Zaccheaus, Britton Covey. They're both 5'8". I think just out of circumstance and just out of body type, you're going to see him get out there, catch a couple passes down the sideline that are going to probably be in high leverage moments, I would imagine, just given the trust factor and his experience. So that in itself, I think, is going to pay dividends. They're not breaking the bank to bring him in there. I think it's a pretty good high upside signing. And I think in the red zone, you could particularly see it pay off.
Yeah, sticking with Julio for a second, because obviously Hall of Famer, guy's got over 900 catches, over 13,000 yards in his career. But one of the things that he didn't do very well in Atlanta was score touchdowns. In 8 of his 12 seasons, he had 6 touchdowns or less. Was that just a product of the way Atlanta used him in the red zone? Or is this guy, because you look at his body, like you said, he should be someone that's unbelievable in the red zone, and he just hasn't scored a lot of touchdowns throughout his career. Do you think he can add to this red zone offense?
Yeah, I sure do, Bill. And that's one of the most puzzling things about Julio's career. When you look at his Hall of Fame numbers, they're the touchdown production. You would expect that to be a lot more substantial than what it is. That being said, I think a lot of it had to do with utilization in that area. And, played with Tony Gonzalez, played with a number of players. And I think that sometimes teams get too cute in the red zone, as we're seeing right now. And I don't think that it's an indicator of a shortcoming or something like that in his game. I think that he can be a factor in there. I think they need to use Julio, but I also think even more so they need to use Dallas Goedert and get those big bodies utilized in the red zone.
All right, let's see if you're on the same wavelength as Bill Colarulo here. He said in the first segment before he punched you up, need for the Eagles still a big-bodied back that they are willing to activate and use on game day. Well, they're going to have to sit one of the 3 backs that they have, and they seem to like all 3 of their backs. They use all 3 of their backs. Swift, the main guy. Gainwell, not far from it. Boston Scott, your kickoff returner in an emergency, throw him in there. They haven't given Rashad Penny much of a shot here. Or could they go out and get a bigger-bodied between the tackles back? Is that a need, in your opinion, for the Philadelphia Eagles right now?
Running back is. And aside from DeAndre Swift, who leads the backfield, he's the standout. You have guys who had built-in roles in Kenny Gainwell and Boston Scott, but none of those, they're able to, do they really move the needle? They've been given opportunities, particularly Kenny Gainwell. Boston Scott has a role as a kick returner, but I think they are sorely lacking a big-bodied running back. Now, they have that, in theory, on the roster in Rashad Penny, but they're not utilizing him. Why is that? Well, I think that I would speak to a lack of burst and juice in his game. He looks like maybe perhaps The injuries have taken a toll on him. He's just 27 years old, but he's suffered a litany of injuries in his career. And also pass protection. If you can't pass protect, you're not going to be active and involved in the game plan on Sunday. So, yeah, I think that's an area that they need to look at. I would also look at reserve safety. I thought Kayvon Wallace would have been a nice addition if they were able to claim him off waivers. Obviously, they were further down the priority list, but Terrell Evans played 50% of the special team snaps, and they need to be able to fill that void. Right now, Sidney Brown would be asked to do that, but he's probably going to take on a more prominent role as a third safety. So I think adding a experienced special teamer from the safety spot, because you don't know what you're going to, if and when Justin Evans is going to return back to the lineup.
Andrew, going back to that running game for a second. So one of the stats that I was telling Jody before you came on was if you look at the last 4 weeks, the average yards per carry just hasn't been there for the running backs. How much do you think that is the way these defenses are playing, or is it the loss of Cam Jurgens at that right guard position?
I think there's a little bit of both. Both can be true, right? And I think the teams you see the explosiveness of DeAndre Swift, and he really was breaking games open earlier in the season. And you find a way to mitigate that and make the Eagles one-dimensional if you can, because their passing game was sputtering or is a little bit uneven to start. I think that's fair to say. So you're trying to find a way to bottle up someone as electric as DeAndre Swift. But that's also coinciding with the fact that I don't think it's a coincidence that the running game really started to falter when Cam Jurgens left and Sua Opeta was inserted. Jack Driscoll played a lot in the Jets game. I think that those two things sort of go hand in hand, but they really need to find a way to get going. They should be able to run the ball on this Washington team, despite them having a really stout defensive front.
All right, believe it or not, we've gone an hour and 40 minutes since the show started, and we have not used the phrase either tush push or a cheek sneak or brotherly shove yet. Still people talking about it on a weekly basis. The National Football League as to whether it should be banned or not banned. How did the Eagles, are they so good at it? Nobody else can do it. I think Nick Sirianni is now actually getting a lot of entertainment out of it and is playing it up, including his speech after the game with his smile and his turn of the head and smirk when he talked about it. Is this a big tush push week for the Eagles this week against Washington?
I think every week is. When you have a secret weapon like that, why not use it? They have the personnel for it, and they're really good at it. And they're just better at it than the rest of the league, as Nick Sirianni and many have said.
Such a weapon. And, it allows Nick Sirianni, we've talked about how aggressive he can be. But last week against Miami, they go for it on 4th down 4 times, 2 of them in their own zone late in the 4th quarter, and it's because of that tush push play. It's a really unbelievable weapon. And you've seen other teams be able to do it. They can't do it. Like Sirianni said, the other teams can't do it. So I hope they don't ban this next year, but I think that's maybe where it's headed.
Yeah, I think so. And you're going to see more and more teams complain and cry about it. But a lot of times, Bill, it's just due to the fact that they can't run it and execute it as well as the Eagles can. And what a weapon it is to have. Yeah, it's almost automatic. It's 1st and 9 always instead of 1st and 10 for the Eagles. Yeah,
and they had Dallas Goedert mic'd up for the game against Miami. There were some pretty good clips. I don't know if you guys saw it of him talking some trash when they're doing the tush push.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
But jumping over to the defensive side of the ball for a second, Week 4 against the Washington Commanders, they let Sam Howell throw for 258 yards. Since that game, 3 weeks in a row now, the opposing offenses are only averaging 183 passing yards, and pretty much with a different secondary group every single week. A lot of credit to Sean Desai, but what are they doing differently to shut down these opposing passing offenses?
Well, they're mixing and matching personnel. They're sending a tidal wave of pass rushers, which over the course of the game, you even saw it against the Jets game, right? Zach Wilson looked a little bit comfortable throwing the football. Then later, as the game advanced, you started to see their line wear down. And that's what the Eagles have. They're able to send waves of guys coming after you, and it really wears down offensive lines. And they, pressure and coverage work hand in hand, right? So it makes life easier on the back end, and they're able to mix and match their personnel. You're getting guys like we mentioned, Eli Ricks, getting different guys plugged in there to, kind of come in certain situations. And Sean Desai has done a fantastic job situationally in the deployment of his personnel, getting everyone involved that's active on game day. We haven't grown accustomed to seeing that. So I think I'm glad you mentioned that, because you have to tip your cap to what Sean Desai has been able to accomplish through 7 games.
This feels like a long time ago, but it was only 4 weeks ago when the Eagles needed to kick a field goal in overtime to beat the Commanders. You got the LA trip in. Last time we talked to our boy here, Andrew, was when he was out there on the West Coast. Lost the Jets, big win over Miami. Seems like more than just 4 weeks ago, but that's all it was. What's changed here that makes you believe the Eagles will win more easily this week on the road? Now, this is Washington's house. I know the Eagles have been very good going into that house and playing there, and you got to take that into consideration. What do you think has what has been the best upgrade the Eagles have had over the last 3 weeks?
Well, you hate to sort of dismiss the offense, Jody, but they're a unit that you can almost feel. You almost feel like they can show up and they have enough talent there to execute and compile points. But I think defensively is where they made the biggest strides. I think Sean Desai's really found his footing as a coordinator. He has a full command of his personnel, and I think the biggest thing with Sean Desai is, and talking to different players, he listens. He listens to their suggestions. And I think when you have that kind of confidence and trust in your personnel and your coordinator, that sort of builds, that sort of lends itself to a cohesive unit. And I think that they're really finding their way defensively, and it's coinciding with the offense. So that's an amalgam of talent that you have that it's sort of a juggernaut that teams aren't going to be able to stop.
Yeah, and against the Washington Commanders in Week 4, Eagles had 5 sacks, and we talked about how Nick Morrow had 3 of those sacks. But they're letting Sam Howell get sacked at literally an unprecedented rate. He's on pace to set an NFL record. Do the Philadelphia Eagles get more than 5 sacks on Sunday?
Absolutely. The Giants got him for 6, right? So I look at their offensive line. They struggle across the board. But really where I see the opportunity, Bill, is center Nick Gates, right guard Sam Cosmi, and right tackle Andrew Wiley. I think he's going to be going head-to-head with Hassan Reddick, and going into the Super Bowl, that was the matchup that I had, Wiley versus Reddick. I think this is the week where you're going to see that really take shape, and he's going to be able to bear down and provide some pressure there. But right up the middle, Jalen Carter, Fletcher Cox, whoever else you want to name that's going to be able to kind of lean in on that line. They struggle across the board, and they're going to have trouble containing the Eagles front.
All right, I'm glad you went there, but because it gives me the right to once again put the guest on the spot. I went over under 7.5 sacks for this game. 7.5. That's a big ass number. But guess what? It's possible. The Commanders are that bad at protecting Sam Howell, and the Eagles' pass rush seems to only get better every single week. Over under 7.5. Andrew, which way you going? Sacks for the Eagles on Howell.
That's funny because I was literally just going to say I have them down for about 7 Sunday afternoon.
So you're just under? You're going to take the under?
I'm going to take the under there, but it's going to feel like 10, I'll tell you. Because
hopefully that is the case. I'm banking on 8 because I did take the over. All right. After the game's over and done with, and I get your official prediction, you believe the Eagles are going to win this week, right?
Yes, sir.
All right. I'll get your score in a second. What's going to be the number one narrative afterwards? Is it going to be the 7 sacks? Is it going to be the Eagles run the football again down the other team's throats? They've done it a couple of times. The 2 games Bill took out earlier to say, if you take those 2 games out, yeah, they just ran the ball down the opposition. Is that going to be what's going to be the main storyline after the Eagles' victory against the Commanders this week, if that's the way it plays?
I think it's going to be the pass rush really coming to the forefront, Jody. The first matchup, I expected there to be 8 or 9 sacks, right? I thought that was going to be a Carson Wentz-esque game from the year before, but it never really materialized. This, as you're starting to see them build this momentum, I think that's going to be the storyline coming out of this game, how they're able to take advantage of vulnerability on the opposition.
So we're talking about sacks by the Philadelphia Eagles team. But the one thing that this Commanders defense does well, because they don't do a lot of things well, but one thing they do well is get after the quarterback. Mm-hmm. And they did sack Jalen Hurts 3 times in Week 4. And the Eagles are giving up a lot of sacks, 20th in the league, giving up 17 sacks. They did last year too. It's kind of just the nature of the Jalen Hurts offense a little bit. But do you think that they can neutralize that strong defensive front for the Commanders this week?
Yeah, Bill, that's a tough matchup for any offensive line. And yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because you don't want to just dismiss it and think they're going to completely roll this team. They do have certain ways in which they can provide pressure to teams, and that's up front: Jonathan Allen, Deron Payne, Montez Sweat. And providing pressure up the middle is where I really see them being able to really get Hurts off his spot, flushing him out of the pocket, particularly, going against Kelsey and Sua Opeta, who's going to require some help this week. I just don't know if they're going to be able to afford it, knowing that they have players across the board that can really wreak havoc. And then offensively, I would look at Curtis Samuel as being the X factor for them, knowing that you can get him the ball in jet sweeps, short dump offs, and he's really explosive after the catch. Those are some of the storylines that I think if you're Washington, you're looking to exploit.
All right, Andrew, last one, 2-part question. The second part will be you need to give me a score in the game. But the first one is, and I specifically on Birds 365 dropped notification to the new owner of the Commanders that he should have kept a low profile. And he did. Coming to Lincoln Financial Field, you're still the owner of the Sixers here in town, big guy. Know that the Commanders are a priority, but just hang low, down low. Keep it on the down low. And he did. He didn't get caught on camera at all. This is his house. This is down in Washington. This is a little bit of a different story. Over shots of the Commanders owner, Mr. Harris, on the television broadcast on Sunday. I'm going to set it at 1.5. Will they show Mr. Harris twice or more on the broadcast?
I'm going to take the over on that one.
Over.
I feel confident about that one, Jody.
Okay, yeah, so do I.
I
did my hat to Harris because I said, Joshua, just don't be dumb. Getting a boots over, stay under wraps. Don't let the TV, because he'd get killed here in Philadelphia. The Commanders came into town and he's out there pumping his fists or whatever. And he didn't want to go there.
He's going to have James Harden in the box with him, Jody.
Oh, I hadn't even thought about that. Good suggestion there, Color. He's ticked off because they didn't take him to Milwaukee last night. So maybe he does hop in a car and go.
You got to appreciate the Eagles organization when you look around and see what's going on with the Sixers, man.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, a little ugly on the Sixers. All right, Bill, need you on the record. You've got the Eagles winning. I got the Eagles winning. Johnny Max got the Eagles winning. Damos got the Eagles winning. The question is by how much? What do you think the final score is on Sunday?
You going to me or Andrew here? Andrew. Right? Yeah.
Excuse me.
I have the Eagles winning 31-20.
31-20. All right, so you got them by 11 points. That's a fairly easy victory. Andrew, we love whenever you come on with us. Thank you very much for doing us today. We'll get you back in a couple of weeks.
Sounds great. Talk soon, guys.
Thanks, Andrew.
DiCecco from InsideTheBirds.com. 31-20, Eagles on top. It's close to my score. Micah is similar. We'll get my boy, Mr. Colarulo's score when we come back. One more segment of Birds 365 here on a Football Friday. Stay right there.